Alright, post-fight review of Jarrett Hurd successfully unifying his IBF light middleweight championship against Erislandy Lara for Lara's WBA light middleweight championship in what was a really good fight. Definitely a fight of the year candidate. Just an exciting fight pretty much all the way through. Lara started off really well, being able to outbox Jarrett Hurd as a lot of people expected. I mean, even I expected him to be able to outbox Hurd in the early goings, but just because Jarrett Hurd may have a style that's not necessarily the most technically sound and isn't necessarily the most fundamentally sound, even fundamentally, technically, not textbook in the slightest. Nor is it particularly savvy in terms of defense or in terms of like just overall creativity. Jarrett Hurd is one of these guys in boxing, in the sport of boxing, that shows you that boxing at the end of the day is still a physical contact sport. And if you can't deal with the physicality that he's bringing, it's going to be a rough night. It's going to be a long night, and it might be a very tragic night for you at the end of the day. Um, Lara started off really good, landing a lot of clean shots, appearing to definitely knock Hurd off balance multiple occasions in the early rounds. But Jarrett Hurd was actually showing a bit of an improved defense here in this fight again, as opposed to some of the recent ones that he's had, where he was able to, at the very least, high guard and block, or at the very least take something off of a lot of the shots that Lara was able to break through his guard with. He was able to, either roll some of the shots or slough them off, or kind of like partially block them on their way to the glove making contact with his body or with his face or what have you, parts of his head, his shoulders, etc. And he was going to the body, digging to the body, lots of left hooks, those left hook liver shots. Also a lot of right hands to the other side of the body, towards more where your stomach is, which is, I think, really an underutilized shot, and a shot that a lot of boxers, generally speaking, aren't necessarily ready for. So sometimes when you see a fighter throw that shot, it could be a very dangerous and very, very effective shot in being able to especially slow guys down and slow guys down in the later goings, because when you just keep hitting them in the body, hitting them in the body, hitting them in the body, that'll take, at the very least, some of that connective tissue that goes down to your legs, that'll take some of that away, take some of that extra movement away, force them to be a sitting duck, and just wear them down. And wear Lara down is exactly what Hurd did, because even though Lara was lighting Hurd up in a lot of the early rounds, a lot of the mid rounds, Hurd just slowly but surely started, it started smoking, almost like smoking Joe Frazier, albeit like not as sound as him even. Just started hitting him, just slowly working away, hitting him with grazing shots to the body, shots to the head, doubling up, and being somewhat creative in there as well. Sometimes he would just come at herky-jerky angles, change up the angle on Lara a little bit, and so Lara would get hit with certain shots that he wouldn't necessarily be ready for. Also, at a certain point, it seemed like Lara was trying to, at the very least, get some of Jarrett Hurd's respect and keep Hurd from just kind of bullying forward after him. But he pretty much wasn't able to really do that. There was never really much of an occasion where you saw Hurd like ready to go down necessarily, except maybe in that first couple of rounds where he didn't necessarily have his rhythm together and he was getting hit kind of off balance. But otherwise, he never really looked hurt. But as the rounds kept pressing on, it looked like he was definitely hurting Lara more, leaving Lara a little bloody, a little bit more bruised up, swollen up. And pretty much the last third of the fight was all Jarrett Hurd. Jarrett Hurd just turned it up even higher. And, the guy's a machine. The guy's very well physically conditioned, and he's very strong. He's like, I've made the comparison a few times. He's like certain movies, like an Indiana Jones movie, where it's like the walls are closing in on either side of you, and no matter how much you push back on those walls, the walls won't go back to the way they were. They're just going to keep closing in on you and closing on you until they finally crush you. And even though he didn't actually score the stoppage against Lara, he did drop him in the 12th round, and at the very least on my card, that gave him the victory, because I had it 6 rounds to 5 for Lara going into that 12th. He won the 12th, and he scored the knockdown for the extra point, so I had Jarrett Hurd up by 1 point when it was all said and done, just like a couple of the judges had it. To me, it was definitely an either-way type fight, but especially the way that it turned out, the way that the fight played out, Jarrett Hurd definitely deserved to get the victory, regardless of if it was close or not, simply because of how just towards the end of that fight, man, he just took over. He just took over, and Lara was, he looked like a marathon runner just crawling across that finish line, like where even, win or lose, you could just tell that he was spent. He was just absolutely spent at the end of that fight. And Jarrett Hurd is a plot problem. Afterwards, of course, Jermell Charlo, WBC champion, he was talking about, hey, let's make the fight with Hurd. Very conveniently, finally after Lara's been beaten now, he's anxious to unify, and I have Hurd beating Charlo. I think Hurd will, slowly but surely, walk Charlo down and crush him with the two walls, just like he's been doing to several of his last recent opponents. That said, Jermell Charlo, I think, does punch harder than Erislandy Lara, but I'm not necessarily sure if he moves better than him. I personally don't think that he does. I think that some of his lack of overall boxing skill was a bit exposed when he fought against John Jackson. John Jackson was soundly outboxing him until he managed to finally catch him and knock him out. But like I said, he hits harder than him. So, I mean, it's going to be a measure of, will Charlo be able to knock Hurd out before Hurd tires Charlo out? I think ultimately is what's going to come into play in a fight like that. But I think it's going to be a great fight. I think, Hurd is an action fighter. He's definitely value for money in terms of excitement value. He's a fighter that, he's just going to keep coming. He's like Jason Voorhees, like Freddy Krueger. He's like an Antonio Margarito, like an Omar Figueroa. He's not necessarily the most defensively savvy or the most even savvy offensively, but I mean, just the guy is fantastically conditioned, very strong, and I mean, he's just looking to manhandle you in there, wear you down, and take you out just by attrition. He has a tremendous will to win, and win is exactly what he's been doing lately. He's going to be a very, very difficult fighter to beat at 154. I wouldn't necessarily like his chances if he was to move up to 160, but unlike most people, I think people overuse the idea and the term of being a weight bully, so to speak. I mean, the guy was 163 on fight night. He was only a pound heavier than Lara, or at the very least, fight day. That was the IBF morning weigh-in that they showed on the Showtime broadcast and everything. But I doubt he gained very much beyond that after that. I think people overestimate how big the guy is. I mean, sure, eventually he'll probably move up to middleweight himself because, he's at that age where you could theoretically expect somebody to maybe move up one weight class, but I wouldn't necessarily see him moving up anything beyond middleweight. But as it is, I mean, as long as he's able to make light middleweight, 154, he's going to be just hell on wheels for anybody and everybody there and looking to potentially move up in there. And that's bar nobody. That's, that includes the likes of an Errol Spence. Really, really good fighter. Really great fight. Unfortunate for Lara that one of his most exciting fights wound up coming in a loss for him. But ultimately, it seemed like that was going to be the way it was. The Angulo fight was definitely up there as well, though, in terms of excitement. Great fight between those two back in the day. And of course, Angulo was actually on the undercard. Lost split decisions to Sergio Mora. I haven't necessarily seen that yet, so I'll give my take maybe later on if I ever get a chance to catch footage of that. Also on the undercard was James DeGale managing to avenge his defeat in a pretty ugly, not so exciting fashion against Caleb Truax. Managed to win that belt back, the IBF belt, but the way that I see it, James DeGale is on his last legs. It's pretty much time for him to get his final paydays. Probably a big fight with George Groves could potentially loom. I'd imagine him versus Chris Eubank Jr. could be a pretty exciting fight, a competitive fight. Maybe he might be able to take advantage of Eubank's inexperience and his overall lack of kind of boxing skill and lack of just his lack of skill, plainly. He hasn't necessarily worked on the skill set and being able to do the technical things very much as he has been just a physical force against the guys that he defeated anyway, up until he managed to get the title shots with Saunders and Groves, who were able to pretty soundly outbox him. So perhaps DeGale could do that, but on the other hand, maybe Eubank is able to kind of physically just outmuscle DeGale the same way that Caleb Truax did in their first fight. It's anybody's guess, but DeGale versus Truax was not a very good fight. Just a lot of spoiling. Both guys kind of stalemating each other throughout the entire of the fight. Fight really that could have gone either way, but DeGale just nicked it by being a bigger spoiler than Truax was able to get his shots off. That's pretty much all there was to it with that. And then, of course, Julian J. Rock Williams managed to get back in the win column against Nathaniel Gallimore. And what was a pretty good fight. Gallimore started off looking really good, outboxing J. Rock, but seemed to tire out in the mid-rounds, and J. Rock started to take over. Was able to kind of outfight him in the inside and outfight him down the stretch. And ultimately, that's what won it for J. Rock. Good win under his belt. But I'm not necessarily sure if he'll be able to get over that title holder hump necessarily. He definitely still has a certain degree of weakness about him. He looked pretty shaky in the early goings against Gallimore. As for Gallimore, relatively inexperienced, took the step up, and ultimately I think the lack of experience, the lack of proper conditioning, harmed him here against J-Rock in what was really a winnable fight for him. But overall, a pretty good card. Very entertaining main event. Definitely lived up to the occasion. Pretty much, actually, really lived up to beyond the occasion, because I didn't necessarily see anybody expecting Lara versus Hurd to be a fight of the year type of fight necessarily. I mean, there was a few people that kind of hinted at it, but it wasn't necessarily a widespread, supremely popular belief. But that's all there is to it, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.